welcoming Jos Schmitt to Startup Grind. Why don't we start in Europe, and why don't you tell us some of the experiences that led to the Alpha experience?
Sure. Well, I think going back to Europe, probably the very beginning of my career, which was very helpful to me, was to spend a number of years with a large consulting firm. So that's where it all started. And what I learned after my university days, where I learned a lot about methodology and approach and thinking and call it whatever you want. The one thing that I didn't learn was discipline. And that I learned over there. And I'll never forget that after 3 months I got my, my assessment for my first 3 months of work. And I can tell you that if the next one was the same, I would probably not be here and I would not have been in that company anymore. That was very well for me, very helpful, learning the discipline of working. It's not only about working hard, but it's working in an environment where you need to take everything into account. That experience and that company took me into the exchange world, and more specifically helping with the implementation of a technology platform, a trading platform at the European exchange, which I did. The trading platform, quite bizarrely, was the old trading platform of Toronto called CATS, Computer Automated Trading System, for those who may remember. And I enjoyed it that much that I went to the chairman of the board of the exchange and said, I want to join you. And he said, I like you, so why not? I joined the company and was head of strategy and operations. So started in a very nice way in that organization, and for a year worked on what can we do to grow it, to make it better, more efficient. And then the opportunity came up to launch the derivatives exchange and clearinghouse. Participated as person in charge of strategy to that entire exercise. We then needed a CEO. I was helping in identifying the CEO, and one late night in a bar had a chat with someone who said, wouldn't you be interested by that? And I said, well, yeah, I would. So why are you not going for it? And I said, yeah, I should. Next day, I talked to the chairman of the exchange again, and I talked to the lead of the banks, who was a CEO of a bank. Had a couple of conversations, and 3 weeks later, they offered me the role of CEO of a derivatives exchange and clearinghouse to be set up. And I guess that was the beginning of my life of building and growing exchanges and trading platforms and clearinghouses and things of that nature. And I was 28 at that moment, so it was an incredible opportunity. What is particularly important, I would probably say, in those few things I mentioned until now, it's opportunities always pass by. They are there, they're in front of us, and the trick is to grasp them, take them when they are there, and then give it all. And you don't necessarily have it all, you don't necessarily have all the experience, but don't be afraid. Work hard and have a lot of discipline in the way that you work, and never forget one thing. You are just as successful as the team that you have around you, and always finding the right people is critical. So did that for a number of years until Europe. It's all different countries, and we all love each other. But when the French decided to take over the majority of exchanges over there, you can imagine that as a Dutch person, you don't want to work for a French person. So, and vice versa. Even though, by the way, the French and the Dutch are probably the two nations that like each other most, because we all make jokes about the Belgians and the Brits. But this being said, at that moment, another opportunity in a very interesting way came by. A new consulting company was in the make, consulting company that some of you may know, called Capco, focusing on the financial industry only. And I joined that as one of the co-founders. And then we grew it up from 98 to 2001. I think we reached 1,000 people. In 3 months into 2001, 6 months in 2001, we were back at 600. You can imagine what we went through. But then we built a good foundation and continued to grow it. And
So what was the model for that? So you were a co-founder, how many co-founders?
there was 8 altogether. 8 altogether.
Globally?
Globally, yeah. Those
Okay.
people from, we started with people from the US, UK, Belgium, England, France, and that was it.
It was a partnership model?
That was a partnership model, yeah.
Okay, and how did you know the people before?
All partners, you know, through one person who was, I would say, the initiative taker in this case. He had, one way or another, worked with those various partners in one of his prior lives. He I would define him as a very big entrepreneur, and he had set up a company before and reached out to many of the clients that he worked with, as well as some of the partners he worked with.
So were you part of that bloodletting from 1,000 down to a 600? And so, you know, that's an experience that everybody has to go through. So tell us a little bit about, you know, how to make those kinds of decisions, and also, you know, the emotional fallout of, you know, I know that John Chambers from Cisco says, you know, that's the worst part of his job. He never, ever wants to be in a position where he has to downsize the company again.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a reality of our world. I think we go through it continuously. The world is made out of cycles, and you know, you wish you could always manage on a growth path, but that is not reality. But the one thing that I would say to you, and believe it or don't believe it, but the only way to get through all of this is to not be emotional. And you know, I don't know if I'm lucky or unlucky about that. You can ask my wife, but I tend to be relatively unemotional. You have to look at the facts, because at the end of the day, what you need to think about is you need to save the larger group, the larger system, the larger entity that you have in place. And as much as, you know, no one likes to let people go, that is obvious. But you always have to realize why you're doing it, and that there's a purpose for it. And the purpose is, you know, to maintain a company, to maintain a system alive that will grow again, and that when it grows, you know, we'll be able to be part of, you know, creating new job opportunities for new people in. And in the meantime, you know, that company, or Capco, went through a tough period, but reestablished itself. Had to rethink itself also in a number of areas, because, you know, when you go through periods like that, you know, we were a little bit surfing on the entire internet wave of those days and taking advantage of that. So you have to rethink yourself, refocus yourself, and identify the areas where there is, you know, opportunities and where there's a real need. And that is one of the comments that I always make to every entrepreneur. You know, you can do whatever you want, but the first thing you need to think about is there a customer need? Because if there's no need, there's no business. And that is what we did at that moment. So tough, yes, but you know, I think it's part of the things you need to go through.
How was Alpha received on the domestic front? How was it received by the Toronto Stock Exchange, and how did your relationship with the executive of the Toronto Stock Exchange evolve?
Well, I think at the beginning it was probably received with you know, a lot of skepticism. I would say, you know, it will never work to build a marketplace that will take substantial market share. Some of the initial you know, estimates that I picked up was, you know, they have a couple of percent of market share. It's probably going to be good, and that is marginal to us. The second comment that you heard is, you know, those 6 large bank dealers behind it are never going to be able to work together. We know how banks work with each other, so this is going to be another failure of that same nature. And I think there's been a lot of, or a lack, I would say, of recognizing or being cautious about what a competitor can do or what a competitor can be. You know, never underestimate your competitor, as small or as big as he is. Always be very cautious about it. And I think they underestimated us, and then we managed to grow the market and grow it fairly rapidly with with a very strong group of market participants supporting it, believing in it, and believing in it because we were fundamentally seeking to establish an exchange similar, or a marketplace I should say in those days, similar to the TMX, but in a much more efficient way. And the industry, or the dealer community, would benefit from it from a cost perspective. So if you look at Alpha, if I would define Alpha, I would say it was truly a cost play. How can we do things faster, better, at a lower cost than what the incumbent is doing? And it worked very well. It took us to over 20% market share.
So when we met, it was shortly after Alpha had released some research, and you were advocating on behalf of well, the technology sector really, in terms of improving listings in the technology sector. That stretched into, you know, fostering mentoring ecosystems, and also, you know, you were quite vocal on crowdfunding. How do you think that those efforts impacted, you know, so since then these kinds of things have emerged, although Alpha has kind of, you know, gone away. So a little bit about, you know, how that arc worked.
Yeah, well, you know, when you look at Alpha, as I said, the initial play was a play about, you know, call it it's almost like the Olympics, better, faster, higher. But what we also saw at in the last third year, fourth year, that is, you know, you don't live only on that. You always have to, as I mentioned earlier, rethink yourself, come with new concepts, and create new value propositions. And we started to look a little bit around that, you know, what else was going on in the capital markets, and we realized very rapidly that the entire ecosystem to grow technology companies, and I would probably expand it beyond technology companies, is not working very well. And it has nothing to do with the fact that we lack smart people, that we lack good education, or that we have people with a lot of great ideas. I think there's lots of them, and I've met a lot of them. I don't think it has to do with the fact that we lack capital in Canada. There's a hell of a lot of money in this country. It's all over the place, but there is a lot of money. It's said that it keeps going to other places, and it's not necessarily coming into the world of the entrepreneurs. I think we have a lot of programs at governmental level. We have a lot of initiatives to support very early stage companies. I think if you look at seed capital, I think there's a lot of seed capital available today. I think there's a lot of triple Fs, as I call them, you know, friends, families, and fools. Exactly. I think there's a lot over there to start new ideas. But what we have seen, and we did that analysis still in the Alpha days, is that two big elements are missing. One, there is still a lack of mentorship, of people helping young entrepreneurs, startups, to find their way, and find their way in the proper way in a world which is quite complex. You know, it's great to be a champion in a specific area, you know, to be an expert, to come with a great idea, but then how do you fund it? How do you take it to market? How do you develop a distribution channel? How do you acquire clients? How do you manage a company? I think lots of items of that type are still missing. And then the second one, and I'm sure that many of you are aware of that, because the first one you can tackle, and there's a lot of initiatives, but the second one, there is an enormous funding gap as soon as you get into the, I would say above the $2-3 million, and you want to take a company. I always look at companies in a very simple way. You have starting a company, you have building a company. Starting is, you know, when you define it and design it. Building it is when you start to really develop your product and find your first clients, and then grow it. Once you get at that, grow it, there's no money. There's a big issue to find money here in Canada. And what people do, what you constantly see happening, is they exit very early. So yeah, you maybe get a little bit of money out of it, but you probably missed an enormous opportunity to build a great company with all the benefits it could represent for you as a founder, but also for the entire economy here in Canada, and for employment. We talked about employment earlier. The second alternative that you see is people just go to the US. They say, you know what, doesn't work here in Canada. Let's go and find some investor in the US. The ecosystem over there is much better. And then the third one, and I always say, be careful about the mermaids, is that people go public. They go public far too early in their life cycle. Think about it. You are a company that should still be focusing on growing, developing your business, making sure that your products are working well, and suddenly you're exposed to a world where you face, quarterly results, a world where you face enormous reporting needs, a world where you are publicly listed, publicly traded, and we don't really have many investors who are that interested in you at that stage. And then you see a company that trades 500,000 shares a week, no liquidity. No liquidity, you become an orphan company. You need funding again afterwards. People will say, well, wait a minute, this is not a very liquid company. I'm going to want a discount for this. So I think those are many of the issues that we saw and that we identified, and where we said we need to come with new solutions. And Alpha's thoughts in those days were moving towards, how can we create a public listing environment. Indeed, we were at that moment very focused with Alpha on technology, but also how can we build a system that is going to help those small and mid-cap companies that should not go public and that cannot find funding. And that is pretty much where the Alpha story stopped. I remember having some chats, before my departure with the TMX about, I think you should think about moving in some new spaces, think about private securities. Never really happened. And then came up the idea of Equitas.
Right, and okay, so one more backgrounder, and then we're going to try to get some questions from the floor. I have like a dozen in my head, so the founding story of the new entity and how it's different.
Yeah, I think the founding story of Equitas is probably summarized in a couple of words, to the contrary of what many people think. Equitas is not Alpha 2 or Alpha Square. On the contrary, because when we had the initial talks about launching a new marketplace over here, my initial view was negative. Already have enough marketplaces. But then what I agreed that at that moment, with who the partner was, and the partner at that moment was RBC, was to look at what's going on in the Canadian market, what are the big issues. And as you can imagine, we came back with the issues around the funding for small and mid-cap companies. We also came back with the view that there's too many publicly listed companies in Canada that should not be public, and we should give them that other solution. When you go public, make sure that the company is ready for it. It will help it in its success. We looked at many of the issues which have been a lot in the press since of market or quality of execution on the markets and the impact of high-frequency trading, predatory high-frequency trading. I don't know if anyone over here has read the book Michael Lewis in the meantime, Flash Boys, but gives you a clear view of what we identified and what we're looking to tackle. And then, the last key element of why Equitas is a fundamental need in this market for competition, and it is quite interesting and fascinating and great for everyone. I think it's a good thing that 2 weeks ago the Toronto Stock Exchange announced the launch of a private securities market, and that was announced because there's a competitor there that wants to do things and wants to do things differently, and that is us.
So they filed with the OSC and were going through the approval process and had announced that they're doing a new stock exchange, but also the private trading platform. And so then, as a competitive move, the TX. Okay, so there's a few things. What I'd like to try to do is, right now, is sort of like, how does this get really real for the earliest stage startups? You mentioned a few things like mentorship and why, how that's so important. But I think the key word for me is liquidity. And our second event that we had as the Startup Grind chapter was with Howard Morgan. Howard is an investor in first round capital, and he's also one of the early instigators of the New York ecosystem. And so we put the question to him, and he said it's all about the exits. It's all about liquidity, because you don't get mentorship unless, right, people have had their exit, and they're not living on noodles, right? And they can afford to sort of say, okay, I'd like to take 10 bets or whatever, and I'd like to, give back to the ecosystem. So how is this, what you're doing, going to lead to that?
Well, that takes us really to that private securities market now, and let's zoom in a little bit on that. Let's forget what we're doing on the listing or the trading side, or what we're doing in other areas. And what that market is all about, it is really two functions. One, a function that we all know, we've seen in many ways, shapes or form, but a vehicle that will allow small and mid-cap companies to present their organization, their business plan, or whatever else you want, to a group of investors. And that will be accredited investors, so people who comply with a number of criteria that they can.
So is this angel list?
I would say you could compare that at a high level with an angel list concept, yeah. And I could give you 5 other names of institutional organizations that are doing things of that same.
What about second market? Does it fit with second market?
Second market is a good example of it also, but they started more on the other side. They started more with providing a liquidity platform. So what we want to do is combine them both. So we'll have that vehicle that allows you to go to market, to raise capital, to raise funding with a group of investors. And I tell you, there's a lot of those investors here. They're just all spread around the country in little hubs around certain dealers or EMDs, exempt market dealers. So being able to bring that together, network it together, create a hub amongst those various spokes, that is what we want to do. And then we want to complement that with a second vehicle, which is in our eyes extremely critical, a place where you can trade those private securities. Because that comes back to your point, Michael, about liquidity. Why are investors today often reluctant to invest? Because it takes a lot of time, to get your money back. Typically, what you will see if you look today at an IPO, where 10, 15 years ago it took between 3 and 4 years. Now it takes probably between 9 and 10 years, and investors can't wait that long. They don't want to wait that long. They want to be able to sell and again, have their capital working in something else again. So what is then happening? Well, either people don't, or they push companies into sellouts, exits, which maybe represent money but are far too early in the life cycle of that company. And we miss all those companies, that could represent a lot of growth for this country. Our vehicle will complement that funding mechanism with a mechanism where you can trade those securities, and not in a market where you trade 5 days a week, 7 hours a day, because when you have a security only trades 500 or 1,000 shares, which is normal for a young company, you don't want to use the mechanisms that you use for large publicly listed companies. So you're going to customize the trading mechanism, the trading models to where that company is in its life cycle, so that you pool liquidity, you make liquidity come together. That is really a key vehicle, and if you can do that, you will see many more investors come to the small and mid-cap companies. I'm 100% convinced about that, and the examples are there. The examples are in the US, the examples are in the UK, in Israel, in France. We just don't have any good solution of that nature in Canada, and I think that is what we want to bring in. If we generate competition by doing that, I say great, because that will make it better for everyone.
Okay, so themes of Startup Grind are to inspire. So, here's a startup that is in the core business of Toronto, where so many startups don't have an opportunity to crack in. So I hope you find part of it inspiring. To educate, so we're talking about the liquidity in the market, but it's also to connect. So what questions do you have? And let's try to keep this as fluid as possible. Go ahead, Aaron.
What do you think, is it Equitas? What do you think it'll do to the risk profile of investments? they'll happen in the ecosystem.
So what will Equitas do to the risk profile of the ecosystem?
Yeah, and first of all, Equitas, the name is complex to say, but we did that on purpose, because now you will never forget it anymore. When you look again, it takes you back to the model that we're putting in place. We want to accompany that entire fundraising part, where you're looking really at the type of company that wants to come to our marketplace to fund it and afterwards see secondary trading. We want that to go through a due diligence process, and we can either have that due diligence being done by a third party, an outsourcer. Could, for example, be an incubator who is playing a role of pre-screening, or we will have our own champions, our own people who will do that. We will always have a minimal amount of screening and testing that we will do ourselves. But can you eliminate the risk? No. You can maybe afford $50,000 and then lose everything. So this is what is very important with this model. It's bringing the right risk tolerance in front of the right nature of risk of the companies who are looking for funding. Transparency is going to be very critical for us. Besides, that screening process that we will be doing, transparency will be very key, and we are looking at a number of solutions. I'm not going to say too much about it, but a number of solutions so that there's a continuing form of transparency being made available to investors who either want to trade it on a secondary basis or whenever they decide to do another round of funding.
To what effect? Will that mean investments are at an earlier stage in companies, or no effect really?
When you look at the types of the companies, I would say what we would really be focusing on is probably going to be, above the $2 million. So the very early stage. To be honest with you, I think there's a lot of funding available over here. If you look at some of the governmental programs, you look at BDC, you look at OCE, there's a lot of funding available. But it's really, when we get to that next stage, when we want to grow a company into something where the lack of money is, and that is the area that we want to focus on by pooling investors and by giving investors who are more hesitating to invest because of liquidity considerations, a liquidity exit, which does not mean selling out the company or going public too early.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I'm actually interested in finding out how you funded yourself. So is RBC a major stakeholder in the company, and how do you going to fund your growth?
Yeah. Well, when we had done our first exercise, which was looking at all the key issues we saw and then coming with the solutions. One of the solutions is the private securities market that we just talked about. We went and talked to two large institutional investors, and I would say within a matter of a couple of weeks they said, we love this this initiative, we love what you're doing. And when you look at the participants, they are there for multiple reasons. A lot of them are there because of what we want to do about improving the quality of markets, public markets and the trading over there. And other ones are in there because what we do on the private security space or on the entire growth space. So those were immediately excited about the concept, and then we talked, I think, to another 8 companies, and 6 of them came in. What is clear, and I think it applies for RBC, it applies for me and the team that I then also build around us. We invested also, and that was important to them. It's always quite funny when you look at something like this. I'll be very, very honest with you. I'm doing this mainly because I believe in what I do. I've had a career which is a career longer than 5 years. Kind of 25 years. So you're getting at a stage in your career that you let other things drive you. And what is really driving me here is the fact of being able to fundamentally change things, to be disruptive. because change only comes with disruption, not with evolution. It's one of the other things I always say, that is, disrupt, don't evolve, because evolving is easy to copy. And it's very exciting then to see the results of what you do. But when you talk to investors, it's still very important for them that you show, not only by your conviction and by your words, that you believe in what you do, but also by the fact that you're ready to invest. And what is quite fascinating about Equitas, and not a lot of people know that, but the biggest investors at the beginning were the employees. And then in the meantime all of that changed, because we had to go through a first phase of de-risking, as I call it, which was last year. Going into deeper detail of how everything will work, having a number of conversations, as Michael said, with the regulators. You can come with great ideas and then launch it, and then the regulator at one moment says, we don't like it. So, you need to have a level of comfort that they are going to be comfortable with what you want to do. And once we had that at the end of last year, then we went for round 2, and round 2 is very solid funding. We will do one last round of funding probably at the end of this year. And that is not funding that we need to implement the Equitas. It's funding that we want to give us, one, a good buffer, because you want to have some time ahead of you, and two, to have the basic funding that will allow us to launch our next phases of development wherever they are and wherever they go. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, because last time, or with the initiative now, we had to open pretty much the entire kimono last year to go through the discussions with the regulators, so I'm going to try to keep that a little bit close this time. But very solid investors. There's no majority shareholder. Biggest shareholder in the company has 15%, 1/5. And the other names are, CI, Investors Group, Barclays, ITG, Bell Canada, PSP, and OMAS. So that is the group of investors.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So how do you attract the capital into the market? So they're going to bring that high net worth individual away from their current instruments into this market to start participating. And one of the things I'm thinking about is like the only real high-risk market in the country that exists is kind of like the TSXV resource market with the flow-through shares and things like that. Are you working at instruments that kind of help mitigate that risk in a similar way that the flow-through shares does? Not that that's necessarily a good idea in technology. So how do you bring in those $100,000, multi-million-dollar investors in that market to create the liquidity in the marketplace to trade the shares?
Right, so how are you going to attract high net worth individuals? How are you going to attract capital to the market?
I think it's a process that, to be very clear with you, it's not a process that's going to happen like this. And I think what is going to be very important is to develop your initial success stories, finding the right companies, and building that network of investors. And to build a network of investors, at the end of the day, there's no other way but to leverage individual networks of people that are in that business. It's also one of the reasons why in our model we are not coming with a model that is looking at disintermediating everyone, because by disintermediating you create a lot of unnecessary enemies. And we want to leverage the dealer community to participate in this. And the dealer community, that when we look at them and speak with them, is a community that's saying, of course, everyone will say, well, if I can make, 6% or 8% myself, why would I present this issue to a larger group of investors, or why would I give access to a platform like this to my investors? And when you talk with them, what is very clear is that they are all facing the same issue. That is that they cannot access enough investors, and they have too many deals that are not successful. So they are looking for solutions, and solutions like ours, which are going to, and that's what it's always about. That's also what it's about for me when I look at what we're doing in the trading space. Looking at growing the pie. Don't fight for a pie that someone else has, in a sense. grow the pie together with him. Make him successful, make yourself successful. I would say exactly the same when I look at the markets. When people say, well, are you going to compete with the TSX for trading in the securities market with your totally different model? I say yes and no. What is much more important for me is to attract new market participants, new investors again into this market who left this market because they are fed up with it or they don't trust that market anymore. That is what we need to achieve.
So give us some examples of those kinds of investors that left or fed up, don't trust it.
Yeah, that I think you know is an example. The example I was talking about over there is really an example that relates to the more classic public markets. If you look at the presence of retail investors in those markets, you know, they largely stepped out, and they stepped out for a multitude of reasons. And I think one of the reasons is that they don't trust the markets anymore. They think that the markets are unfair. If you look at people participating in investments or participating in small and mid-cap companies, I can tell you that quite a few people, also on the accredited side, or called people, you know, who are more risk tolerant, who have been involved in some of the public markets today, you know, are fed up with what's happening over there. You know, you trade into a company that's publicly listed, and that company should never have been publicly listed. So you have even a form of misinformation or miscommunication around, well, if it's listed, it has to be, you know, pretty reliable because, you know, my grandfather can trade in it, and he only has, you know, a little bit of money every month. So that is wrong, and I think what we need to get to is to re-establish trust for everyone. And how do you establish trust? That is by making sure that there is clarity, transparency, say the things the way they are, put the right securities and the right mechanism to reach the right investor. Don't make people misunderstand things. Make sure that when trading that takes place in markets, it's done in a fair way, that you don't see that some people have an advantage and some are not. I think it's all about reestablishing that trust, and I think a lot of people lost trust.
Is that what crowdfunding is all about, really? I mean, is that what the emergence of private markets and second market, is it because the retail investor has left the market, and so the finance community has to concoct another way to draw them back?
Well, I think the retail investor has left the market, and I'm sure that the retail investor will come back in the markets. And what I hope for the retail investor is that he's going to be in those public markets that are markets that are mature, where the companies that are traded and listed are companies, you know, with a high degree that will have a high degree of success. And I think what you need to do now is figure out, well, you know, that's great for the big companies, so we're living in a world of big companies, and those big companies will continue to live until one gets acquired or disappears, and we have less and less companies. So what are we doing for the small and the mid caps? Well, I think for the small and the mid caps, it's a period of change. You know, I think we're going through fundamental change where the old model is not working anymore, and we have to develop a model for the small and the mid caps, and make sure that we can bring the right investors in front of those mid-cap companies, and then look at how we can provide retail investors with vehicles and tools. And I think that crowdfunding is a very good tool for that, where they can also participate, where in small amounts, you know, not investing your entire life saving of $100,000 in a couple of securities that are high risk, but where you can invest in small amounts in a controlled way into you know, higher risk companies. And I think that crowdfunding that way can, you know, bring together, collect a lot of money, a lot of capital that can then be injected in those small and mid-cap companies. So that's why I'm very in favor of crowdfunding, and I'm also in favor of you know, seeing more initiatives about organizations launching funds and other vehicles where retail investors can participate, and where you have someone at that moment managing their funds. But please, let's stop having retail investors invest in companies that are high risk and where they don't have any clue or any view about what risk they are taking. And then suddenly, you know, a year ago they realize this is a total disaster. Yeah, because that's the way things goes. High risk, is high risk, and if you don't manage it in a proper way, either by only allowing you to put small amounts in there, leverage crowdfunding, or having your money managed by someone with knowledge and experience, well, you're exposing yourself to that risk.
Okay, so, go ahead.
So, I was speaking with a gentleman who is now a crowdfunding consultant and has his own sort of technology to help other people start crowdfunding websites. And he was saying that technically it's actually been legal for a very long time to crowdfund, and offering memorandums is this other type of situation where the cap is not 2,500 and 1.5 million, it's 10 to 30, and there's no cap, and that's been around for a long time, and the West Coast is much more progressive and forward thinking. So what is there that we think is totally new, but really it's not new in this whole crowdfunding realm? Is there anything else that us startup people haven't heard of that we could use? And what is the difference between the West Coast and the East Coast in Canada in terms of investors?
Well, I'll even go a step further. New crowdfunding is probably an old concept now. It just happened in other asset classes, not in securities. When I say asset classes, I probably should say goods and products and services. But you hit one of the interesting elements of Canada. Canada has a multitude of provinces, and each province has its own securities regulator. So
Is that a nightmare?
I think that is a minefield in which I don't want to get into, particularly when I have an exchange recognition in the pipeline. But what I was going to say is that each province has its own regulations. So something can quite be possible, on the West Coast, and it's not yet possible, for example, in Ontario or in Quebec. And there is, for example, new legislation, coming out on a regular basis where there are those differences. The good news is, I think everyone is moving into the same direction, because the problem is, it's the same with our private securities market. You don't want to create a solution that works, in BC and Saskatchewan. You want something that leverages the entire country, because at the end of the day, you look at Canada. Canada is a big country, but it's not a big population. What is it now? 35 million? I should know that. Am I correct? 33, close enough. So that is twice the population of the Netherlands, and I think we can put the Netherlands in Lake Ontario. So you want to be able to get access to all those investors. You don't want to limit yourself to a small subgroup. And are we now moving in the right direction? Absolutely. I think it's going to be a matter of, in my eyes, before the end of this year, I expect that it's going to be pretty much in place and available across all the provinces.
So let's do a crowd check on this. So U.S. regulation doesn't allow foreign investors to invest in equity crowdfunding, but in Canada, I don't think that the investor has to be domestically domiciled, do they? The investor, does anybody else think that?
They might still be looking at that clause.
What's that?
I think they might still be looking at that
Okay.
clause.
Okay, so
that is
yeah.
possible, because I would have expected that you should be able to set up a structure to allow you to do that. Just like today, you can as a dealer, work for investors out of the US. But this being said, if you look at our platform, our private securities market, well, that market we want it to be available for investors in Canada, but also investors outside of Canada. Will everything be there on day one? Same complexity for us. You need to go through a number of regulatory steps to do that. And it's part of the game, and it's easy to criticize the regulator and say, can't you be faster? Can you do it quicker? Can't you take things more into account? And my reaction would be, no, it takes you back to that earlier discussion I had. They have a key role to play. They have to make sure that, yes, they do everything they can to promote the economy and to help companies to grow, but they also have a key role to play in protecting investors. And that is always a very difficult balancing act. And yes, I would love things to go a little bit faster, and yes, sometimes I know it much better, like we all do, but you know, it's part of another responsibility that they have. And that is also, to a certain degree, where these initiatives are coming from, because they have been stepping up their role in public markets, making sure that public markets are much cleaner, that you know, you have less issues over there in the way that, you know, some incidents happened in the past. And they created that opportunity and that need now for new platforms, which I think are going to be much more adapted, much more valuable to small and mid-cap issuers than the platforms we had in the past.
So if you came here with a question and you need it answered, this is my last call, or you know, let's do some rapid fire. You've had your hand up for a while. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if I understand Equitas correctly, you have a number of plays here. One is obviously the private listing markets. The other one is sort of altering the Canadian market structure landscape there and the better execution. If you were to look ahead a year from now or 2 years from now, once you launch, what's your revenue plan going to look like?
What? Our revenue plan?
Your revenue plan.
Our revenue plan?
Yeah.
The figures or the...
I mean, again, if you were to look at a crystal ball, I know this thing will work
Yeah.
out, but where's, you know, where in the short run is the money going to come from?
Yeah, I think if you look at the plan going forward, I would say the revenue of Equitas itself is going to be mainly going to come from trading and market data. That is the first area where I see the revenue coming from. Then I see it coming from the public listings business, and then I see it coming from the private securities market. And that is a reality, because that is where we're building something, you know, from scratch. People trade, people know trading, people know market data, people know listing, and our value proposition over there is to, as I mentioned before, is to be disruptive and change the current model, which we think is not working well. On the private securities market side, we're building a brand new business from scratch. The good news is, and that is very good news, that we have an organization, a management team, and a group of shareholders that believes in that and that is willing to invest in it. Because, to be honest with you, it would have been very easy for us not to do that private securities market component. If I show you that part in the overall revenue projection, as you say, of Equitas, it's not the one that is, you know, gonna keep the lights on and the data centers running. But we believe in it, and we believe in it for a number of reasons. One, because there is a fundamental need. Two, because we can create something that is going to be beneficial to the overall economy, to the country, to employment. And three, let's also think about ourselves, because we can see the build-up of a pipeline of future companies that can then be listed on the exchange and traded on the exchange. So we're trying to create a virtuous ecosystem, which is going to be good for us, which is going to be good for Canada, and which is going to be good for the people and the entrepreneurs who want to set something up. And that is how things always work.
Go.
Josh, you mentioned about company goes to public and they are overwhelmed with reporting and compliance and regulation. So can you comment how the compliance requirements differ if the company in public domain and they are in private security domain? Would the startup company be would have the similar overhead or less overhead? So what?
Yeah.
Can you?
No,
It
it is a good question, and it would be far less overhead because you don't have all the reporting and disclosure obligations which are typical and specific to publicly listed companies. Sorry. You don't need all of that. So I would say that your effort, you know, if I would compare it, I would say small and mid-cap companies that are publicly listed today, they're probably spending 20–30% of their time and of their cash in that type of activities, which is enormous. If you stay private and you work through a platform like this and you only go to accredited investors or you leverage memorandums of MOEs. Can't say it anymore. Anyways, we mentioned it earlier. Your
Exemptions.
Exemptions, yes, thank you. I should know that word. Then I think you're talking about percentage points because it's a totally different world, and you will want to keep your investors informed, and you will tell them your next story, but you will not be subject to all the regulatory and legal requirements that come with a public listing. So it's not so good news for our friends from Wildeburg Lease. But on the other hand, the good news for them is that we may create many more companies that will become big companies, and I think it's always the same. Don't think short term, think long term.
One or two more? Any other questions? Go ahead, one more.
So what does the company that you list look like? So I'm a $2 million company, I'm growing 100% MRR month over month. I have venture capitalists from the US knocking on my door. Why would I list versus take Sequoia's money or take an exit from Google or whatever? What's going to draw me into this private market versus the traditional paths?
Well, I think the key reason is one, when you look at your company, at the funding for your company, I can tell you one thing, and I don't know what your experience has been, but it's tough to find that investor today that is going to put that 3, 4, 5, 6 million in there. Very hard to find. And what we hope to do with this platform, by creating much more visibility and bringing people together, because at the end of the day, what we're building is a e-harmony of securities market, of securities and investors. And we'll come with the matching profiles also. But I think it will fundamentally help with that. Then two, you as an issuer, well, why would you stay there? Why would you continue to stay there? Let me ask you one question. You know at what valuation Facebook went public?
It was over, yeah, it was, put 100 billion. Let's say 100 billion.
Let's say 100 billion.
Yeah, give or take,
Yeah. You know that they were trading.
Yeah.
They were trading on a private securities market. And you can look at it in multiple ways. You can say, for your own interest, you can take the time to wait, build, grow, and you will get more value out of it. Because once you have a VC firm in there, let it be very clear, they want to get out after 4 years. If you find one that is doing 5 years, you're lucky. But that is their model. And by the way, I'm not saying that's wrong. That is their model, and they rightfully execute upon that model. So if you want to grow something long term, that is the only way to do it. I think it's going to be much more rewarding financially for you. I think it's going to have a much bigger impact on the Canadian economy, because we keep losing a lot of companies, they disappear all the time, and it's going to be really supportive of achieving the objectives of what all the governments and other entities have by making money available for very young companies. It's really going to start to transform those dollars into real employment, and that is not really working well today. So that is why I think you want to go that way. And you can have other reasons. One of the reasons that our friend at Facebook was also looking at maintaining his company private and trading it on the private securities market was also because he wanted to keep full control of it. That plays too. You can have other reasons, because once you go public, you get into a different world. You play in a different ball game, and there's sometimes reasons to that you want to keep it under your control, and that you don't have all the consequences from a board perspective. That is to mention another type of consequence, a control consequence, that you don't necessarily have in a private market. So those are the kinds of reasons that make people take those decisions.
Okay, I'll exercise my privilege to ask the last question. Actually, I have a series of 10 questions. It's a new thing that we're going to try out with sort of a rapid fire wrap up thing that started Brian. Other chapters are doing it as well. But first, I'm going to ask my own personal wrap up question. So, goes to this point about liquidity that we've made. Also, in terms of the experience that you have as an outsider in a way, with your roots in Europe. So you you have an opportunity to observe, the domestic scene here in Canada in a different way. And also your experience in going through this regulatory approval process and seeing how domestic banks are responding to that and how they've positioned themselves in the marketplace. So the question is, we always label this sort of problem that we have as a cultural problem. There's this culture of risk adversity, and that's why we don't embrace innovation. So, based upon those factors that I just talked about, is it culture? Is culture a big issue in Toronto or in the Canadian marketplace?
I think there is a reluctance to change, and is it cultural? Is it linked to the nature of the ecosystem over here? When you look at a very big concentration of much of the business, whether it's capital markets or retail brokerage or whatever it is, amongst a small subset of large organizations that are competing with each other.
Concentration of ownership.
I think concentration, there's I'm sure a cultural element, but I would almost put it this way. I think that there are many more people here in Canada, from what I've observed, who want to bring change, who want to be disruptive. And when I started my career and I did things and came with new concepts and new ideas, I often faced, even in France, well, no, that's not a good example. Even in the Netherlands, I faced, reluctance and resistance to change, and that's particularly true in an environment, where you're not part of the system. I was never part of a system where you are not linked to someone, where you put, things the way that they go, you put them in question. People don't like that. And I think what is very important is to find the right partners, and they are there. There is people who have make change happen in this country. When I look at what happened between myself and RBC, there was someone at RBC who wanted to see change happen. When I go to Ottawa and I meet with Terry over there, you see that there's people who want to make things happen. And what I would always say to every entrepreneur, you got to find some partners and some champions to help you. Also people, by the way, who will tell you that whatever you want to build is total disaster, will never work. And take that with a lot of respect and appreciation, because that also you need to hear. You need to hear people tell you that your idea is a lunatic idea and that it will never work. But having those people with you to help you and help you also fight in a system which is, in general, everywhere against change is very important. Is the US different? US is probably a bit different, but it's also different because it's a population of more than 200 million people, which means that you find more people who want to support change and make change happen.
Okay, Wildeburg Delis. Wildeburg Delis. Wildeburg Delis. I said it correctly?
Almost.
Okay. All right, so here we go. We're trying a new segment here. It's Startup Grind Rapid Fire. 10 questions, quick answers. What item do you own that you would never sell?
That's it. Remember, I'm Dutch, I sell everything.
Okay, good answer. What is your most unusual skill?
My most unusual skill, that is that I managed already to lose my driver's license 2 times in Canada. And I've only been here for 10 years.
Excellent answer. What's more important, strength, speed, or stamina?
I would say stamina, without a shadow of a doubt.
What historical figure do you admire most?
That's an interesting one. I would probably go towards Julius Caesar.
What's the best compliment that you can receive?
I really enjoyed using the service or product that you developed.
What's the best compliment that you give?
Great teamwork.
Who do you think does a good job?
I think those who are willing to challenge the existing environment and who have then the tenacity, and I use the word stamina, or I supported the word stamina earlier, the tenacity and the perseverance to make it happen, because nothing happens on its own. And it doesn't mean that you should, continue with something that is made to fail. Because the other comment that I often make is, if you think you're going to fail, fail quickly, don't wait. But if you have something and it works, don't give up. Keep going, because you will find the funding and you will make the product work, and you will be successful at one moment in time.
What's your favorite season?
I would say spring.
When was the last time you tried something new?
I think this weekend we did some Indonesian at home, and it was quite an experience.
If you could have the attribute of any animal, what would you choose?
The attribute, I would probably look at the relationship there. I could say the Dutch Shepherd, but I prefer the German Shepherd, and its ability to put its teeth in something and never let go.
Excellent. Thanks again to Wildeber Delis. Thanks again, Josh. And thanks again, everybody, for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Very well.